Hi, this is Reverend Dr. Bob Thompson with the fourth bonus question related to our Bible studies in Brunswick Forest, a community in Leland, North Carolina. So, the fourth lesson had to do with the books of history in the Old Testament, which tell the story of the rise and fall of the nation of Israel. We go from Joshua all the way through the book of Esther. And when you look at those particular books of the Bible, violence is rather prominent. So the question becomes, why is there so much violence in the Bible? So let me get my PowerPoint started here, and let's take a look at this question from a number of different angles. Feel free to email me, rdbobt@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any feedback on this, of course, you can also just use the YouTube comments at the bottom. So the Bible is called the sword of the Spirit in the New Testament, but it's very much the sword of the flesh, oftentimes in the Old Testament. So again, the question, why is there so much violence in the Bible? Well, there are certainly many bloody stories in this particular part of the Bible, especially. It's not limited to that. There are many stories of violence elsewhere in the Bible, but we see some awful ones here in the books of history. For example, Judges 19 is probably one of the ugliest stories in the Bible for a number of reasons. There's a prostitute who is killed and dismembered and her parts sent around the country. This sets off a civil war, and thousands of soldiers in the Israelite army die as they attack the tribe of Benjamin, but eventually they regroup and they kill off most of the soldiers, most of the men in the tribe of Benjamin, decimating that tribe's population and requiring a sort of restart for the tribe of Benjamin. So you can see on this text toward the end of the chapter 19 of Judges, 25,000 Benjamite soldiers died that day, valiant fighters. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin, and then they put the towns to the sword. So this is a horrible time of almost attempted extermination of one of the tribes of Israel by the other tribes. There are other stories as well, some of them related to King David, who's not allowed eventually to build the temple because he's a man of blood. And when David is on fire in terms of military or retribution, David can go after it. And so in 1 Samuel 18:27, David is told that he has to bring back 100 Philistine foreskins as a dowry to marry King Saul's daughter, Michal. And I think King Saul probably presumed that David would die in the process. That was his goal, to eliminate this potential rival to the throne. But David instead goes out and randomly kills 200 Philistines and brings back their foreskins. And then you see them sort of piled up in a corner and counted. And this is an amazingly bloody story, and it's not the only one related to David. So while these stories of blood, let's offer a few perspectives. First of all, to remind us that the books of history, as I said in session 4, are descriptive, not prescriptive. That is to say, because you see actions of violence doesn't in any sense justify them for us or for others. Second, two things are true. Violence is abhorrent, but violence is also our present condition. Between the entrance of sin into the world in Genesis chapter 3 and the ultimate redemption of the world in the book of Revelation, sin pervades our societies, and violence is often a result of sin. It's tragic, but it still is wrong. It's abhorrent to use violence for almost any purpose. War is also terrible, and it doesn't matter whether it's an ancient war or a modern war. War is about the killing of human beings, and so we shouldn't be surprised that it happens in the Bible because it happens everywhere else in human history. Also, it's probably a helpful perspective to note that we've come a long way. So the Geneva Convention and other advances in our understanding of war, where war is not supposed to target civilian populations, we have come a long way. But basically, we judge these ancient civilizations and even modern wars based on Judeo-Christian values, that life is sacred. So war is sometimes necessary, but fortunately, we don't have the same level of intense, justifiable, random, pervasive violence that we did in the time of the Bible. And so we're talking about cultures that are 2,000 to 3,000 years old, And we shouldn't be surprised that with all the violence in those cultures, that would be part of the Bible story as well. Well, that takes us to what I think is maybe the more profound question, the more difficult question. What about wars that are actually commanded by God, violence that is directed by God? The word that the Hebrew Bible uses is herem. That's the noun for complete destruction. We're going to eliminate everything. The verb would be haram, to completely destroy. And there are times when God instructs his people not only to fight a war, but to completely destroy everything and everyone. So, for example, in the book of Joshua, the people are told to go to the city of Jericho and destroy with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. They're told to do this by God. And in fact, one person who doesn't follow this directive, a guy by the name of Achan, he and his whole family die as a result of punishment because they did not follow the Lord's instructions. In 1 Samuel 15:3, Saul is told to go destroy the Amalekites and do the same thing. Don't spare anything or anyone, put everything to death, destroy it all. So, what are we to do with these passages where it's God actually instructing the total destruction? First of all, it's helpful to remember this is not only an ancient problem. So there are times when at least the perception is the greater good is complete destruction. And whether or not we agree with it in retrospect, certainly that was the argument for the atom bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, because the theory was if we didn't do that, so many more lives, American lives, but also Japanese lives, would be lost in these conflicts. And the only way to end the conflict would be total destruction through the atomic bomb. Another perspective on holy war is that the Bible sees this as judgment on people who have gone beyond the point of redemption as a culture and as a society. So in Genesis chapter 15, verse 16, Abraham is already living in the land, and he's told by God that you cannot have the land yet because, quote, the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. In other words, when the children of Israel come back into Canaan several hundred years later, their sin, the depth of their degradation as a society has gotten so far that the only way to eliminate the problem is to completely eliminate the people. So that's the goal. The goal is to eradicate paganism in the land of Israel. The people were not told to go to the neighboring countries, build an empire, and eliminate everything and everyone in those neighboring countries, even when they were attacked. But in the land itself, there had to be this total attempt at radically eliminating paganism within their new homeland. They didn't do it, and that actually bore consequences in later generations. Another reason for the holy war is that war is often seen as a means, particularly in ancient cultures, as a form of greed. Like we're going to go in and we're going to destroy the people or destroy the army so that we can keep the women and the children for ourselves. We can keep if there are any valuable minerals there, they're ours. We can have the land for ourselves. So the point is that the Israelites are not to profit from these wars. If they go and destroy all the cattle and the sheep and all of the crops, then they're not actually gaining anything out of it. They're simply doing something that God directed them to do without resulting benefit for themselves. Another perspective on holy war is that, as we said in our studies in session 4, God is not on a side. I think he weeps over the Canaanites that are killed. God's goal is redemption of all of the world. He's using Israel toward that goal. And sometimes there is incredible pain that must be suffered by individuals or groups in the process. But God's plan is bigger than that war, than that situation. God is not on his side. He's not wanting, Israel to be redeemed and not the rest of the world. This is all part of a broader plan to redeem the whole world. And God is always desirous that all men and women would come to him and be redeemed for eternity. Final perspective is that this story is always to be continued. So whatever's happening in the Old Testament as it plays out, it's really preparation for something else that's coming. But whether it's a story of a particular harem or not, the violence that's happened, God is using all of those events for a greater purpose and a greater good. The story's not over. And there are simply levels of progress in the story as we understand God and as the workings of God continue throughout human history. And that leads me to this final point that in the Christian perspective, all of the Old Testament is a setup for Jesus. It's a preparation for Jesus. Jesus comes from the line of the Jews. But also, when we see how bad sin is, whether it's among the Canaanites and the Israelites are destroyed by God or allowed to be destroyed by the Babylonians and Syrians for the same reason, for their paganism and their idolatry, but it's all a setup. Like there's no way the world can redeem itself through its wars or any other means. The only way for the world to be transformed is by the love of God shown on the cross of Jesus Christ. So their judgment and mercy uh, coalesce, and God's judgment on sin also provides mercy for the world. So those are just a few perspectives. I hope something in there is helpful to you. And would just once again say, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at rdbobt@gmail.com.